So hi guys, and I'm Retro Critic here, and today we're going to review and talk about Crash Nitro Kart. And in this game, this is like the first new Crash racing game on the PS2. Crash racing game on the PS2 for the first time. So this is a very interesting one here. And this game is mixed bag for some fans, but either way. So guys, let's see if this game still holds up, and let's go find out. Let's see for ourselves. This is an average game. This is an okay game. This game is a mixed bag for fans, and it's just an average game. This is an okay game, and to some Crash fans, this is just a decent racing game. But overall, let's just see if this game still holds up, and let's still see if this is still a good game. And let's go and find out, and let's go and see for ourselves, and let's go check it out. Let's go see for ourselves.
So now onto the story of the game, and the story of the game is interesting and odd, and it can be a interesting concept, but strange, but it's cliche and very cliche, and it's mediocre, and sometimes it's blameable. So now the game opens up with a Space World tournament, but this time with racing in it, and this guy teleports all the characters and heroes and villains are teleported here for a Space World racing tournament, and so all the characters are here. So now on to the gameplay, and the gameplay is quite something, and it is something, I'll tell you that. It is fascinating, and I will go on. And so now, let's get started. So the story is bland and lame. So the story of the game is generic and typical I ever seen. So now the game. And the gameplay is bland and generic and typical and lame I ever seen. The racing in this game is okay and decent in a few areas. The racing in the game is average and mediocre in some parts. The racing in the game is actually really hard and difficult sometimes. The racing in the game is actually really challenging and frustrating sometimes. And that's kind of all I have to say. Now onto the gameplay. I think the gameplay is okay and average. I think the gameplay is mediocre. The gameplay is fun, it's decent, it's challenging, frustrating, it's hard and tough sometimes. The game is actually mediocre and average, and it can be challenging and frustrating sometimes, and the game can be hard and tough sometimes. So now let's start this game now. So now onto the story of the game. And the story of the game is interesting and odd, and it can be an interesting concept, but strange. But it's cliche, and it's very cliche, and it's kind of mediocre, and sometimes it's bland mostly. The game opens up with a Space World tournament, but this time with racing in it. And this guy teleports all the characters here, and heroes and villains are teleported here for a Space World racing tournament, and so all the characters are here. And so now onto the gameplay, and the gameplay is quite something, and it is something, I'll tell you that. And it is fascinating, and I will go on. So now let's get started with this game. So the story is bland and lame. So the story of the game is generic and typical that I ever seen, and the gameplay is bland and generic. The racing in the game is okay and decent in a few areas. The racing in the game is average and mediocre in some parts. The racing in the game is actually really hard and difficult sometimes. The racing in the game is actually really challenging and frustrating sometimes. So now the gameplay is okay. The gameplay is decent. Yeah, that's about it. Sorry, yeah. The gameplay is not the best, but it is alright. So now the gameplay is not terrible, but it is just average to play it. So now there's race bosses, and the race bosses are just cartoony, laughable. And the race bosses are really challenging, and it's just like we kind of race against the opponent driver boss. And it's kind of challenging. In the race bosses, so then we meet our villain, Emperor Velo the 27th. And Emperor Velo the 27th, I'm just gonna call him Velo. I don't know. Who do I even? So Emperor Velo is this ruler of a galaxy, and he basically races in this galaxy conquest battle royale of racing. I don't know. The racing is actually kind of not as good as Crash Team Racing, but it's similar as good. Racing is actually decent. So now on to the race bosses, and you basically race against your opponent who's a boss battle race. And the race bosses are easy, they're not that hard, and the race bosses are just laughably bad. The character bosses you race against are kind of laughably bad. They're just kind of silly. The race bosses are not that bad. The race bosses are not that hard. They're easy. They're not that bad to race against and beat. But the race bosses are kind of silly. The race boss battles are kind of silly characters. They're very cartoonish. I can't take them seriously, but I can't really take these boss battles seriously. So, the villain, Emperor Velo the 27th, and Emperor Velo the 27th basically teleports our heroes and villains to team up and be in a race galaxy conquest racing tour. And Emperor Velo the 27th is the ruler of a galaxy here. And Emperor Velo the 27th is the ruler of this galaxy who's a conquest, who has our characters in a racing tournament. And it's where he wants to teleport the hero and villains of the game to race against each other. And he teleports hero and who has the heroes and villains to race against each other and win his tournament. You know, I'm just gonna call him Velo, and it's just that. So you have to race to win in this tournament. Blah blah blah. The story's okay and decent. The racing eventually do beat Emperor Velo. He's the toughest boss. All the bosses are fucking ridiculous. Now eventually you do beat Velo. Ridiculous games me, and that's my thoughts. So the gameplay is fine. The gameplay is like good. It's original. It tries to be creative here, and the game is hard. The race bosses, even though I can't, the race boss characters seriously. The race bosses are somewhat challenging and a little bit easy. It depends. And then you do eventually beat Velo. Velo is the toughest race boss ever in the game, and after you beat the toughest boss battle I ever played in my life, Velo. So after you beat Velo, you're basically escape free, and you basically. So the gameplay is not as good as Crash Team Racing. But it is original and creative in its own way. Like Crash Nitro Kart is original and creative in its own way. Crash Nitro Kart. It's not that bad. It's pretty good. And overall, the game is not that bad. I like the game. Crash Nitro is not that bad. It's pretty decent. It's original. It tries to be creative. Crash Nitro Kart. It tries to be original. It tries to be kind of fun. It tries to be original. It tries to be kind of fun. And overall, that's my thoughts on Crash Nitro Kart. Even though I can't take the race boss characters seriously, the race boss racing battles, whatever you call them, are kind of hard and challenging. Now, when we get to Velo is the hardest boss battle I ever beat. Like, seriously, Velo is the hardest boss race battle I ever beat. The hardest race with him I ever beat. It's really hard. And Velo is really hard. So eventually I did beat Velo, and after you beat him, you basically are set free. Okay, you win the tournament, you kind of basically are freed. You basically kind of destroyed him and free. You basically kind of destroy him and free his people. You go back home and you win the tournament. And you go back home and you win the tournament. In the end of the game, you go back home and win the tournament. And in the ending of the game, you go back home and win the tournament.
So guys, that was Crash Nitro Kart. Crash Nitro Kart was an average and decent game. This game's just okay and average. And Crash Nitro Kart was an average game in my view. It's not that bad, I think. It's not greatest, it's not perfect, but it's not that terrible, so it's fine. Overall, and like really, I mean, for a piece, this is at least close as good as Crash Team Racing. This is the closest you'll get to Crash Team Racing. This game is not that bad. For a PS2 Crash game, it's not that bad. Well, I mean, it's at least a lot better than like the upcoming next Crash Racing game we'll get to. Trust me. I have some problems with it, but overall it's fine, and I have some problems with it, and I even have some problems and errors with it. Not a lot, but just, a few. It's still not that bad, and really, I mean, it has some flaws and errors, but with its flaws and errors, it's not that bad. And overall, it's challenging and hard, but I like it that way. It's challenging and hard sometimes, but it's a good kind of challenging and hard sometimes. It's decent, it's fine, and really that's all what I have to say about that on that front. But overall, so I give Crash Nitro Kart a 5 out of 10. Well, actually, no, I think I give this game kind of a 6 out of 10. It's really not that bad, and that's all to say. And that's all to say on that front. And overall, I recommend this game. It's not that bad. It's fun, and overall, it's decent. Go check it out. And overall, this game's fine and decent. So overall, guys, I'm Retro Critic, and I'm out. And I'll see you guys later. And I'll see you guys next time. And I'll see you guys in the next video. And I'll see you guys around. And peace out. And